Hello and welcome. I am Julie Allen, for those of you that don't know me. And today we are here to talk about leading successful transformational change. Before I go any further, for those of you that haven't used Crowdcast, I just want to explain a few of the features. Laura's already helped me out. She's already started in the chat box. So Laura, good afternoon and welcome. Lovely to hear from you. Of course we don't mind you having a cuppa. That's what this is all about. A cuppa and some sharing and learning. So for those of you that are joining me live, if you want, I'd love to hear why you're here, what has brought you to this event. Also, just to point out, at the top of the screen you'll see a follow button, so if you want to follow me on Crowdcast and be kept updated with any of the webinars that I'll be running, please feel free to do that. And at the bottom of the screen you'll see book a 30-minute consultation. So if there are things that we're discussing today that you want to look at in terms of your own team, click that button to arrange a date to meet with me so we can talk about how we could perhaps work together. So Laura, you're here and you're ventured into the chat box if you're willing. I'd love to hear what has brought you here today. And there will be some of you that will be watching this as a recording, so even still, feel free to use the chat box when you're watching the recording. And that is, if you're watching it on Crowdcast, you'll be able to use the chat box. So while you're getting warmed up, or your fingers are getting warmed up for the chat box, really, why are we here? Why have I decided to take this topic this month? Well, really there is a reason in that I have been conducting some organisational reviews and looking at helping organisations to implement change. Laura, thank you. Interesting topic. Currently looking at organisational change. Hi Tori, thanks for joining us. Just asking that question about what's brought you here today. And I think one of the things in terms of, why are we having this conversation? We're having the conversation today because really there is global disruption. We only have to watch the news, see some of the devastating impact of the incident that happened in Syria and Turkey. And so we know that climate change, we know natural disasters, we know advances in technology, we know the economic uncertainty and the cost of living crisis. We know that there are problems with supply chains, and we know recently again about global health and the pandemic that has just occurred. We know that that is likely again in the future. And one of the things that we know is dramatically impacting everybody is demographics. So Tori, what you're saying is constant change, absolutely. So global disruption is here to stay, and how change is hopefully positively transformed. So really we know that we do live in this volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous world, and that change is here to stay. Also want to highlight maybe the webinar that I provided in November, which is about the future workplace. And that is one thing is to consider is the workplaces and structures and processes and practices that we often have in organisations were systems and procedures and hierarchies developed in the industrial age. And really those are no longer fit for the world that we live in today. So we really need to revamp our organisations to make sure they are effective and efficient and can deliver value for the organisation. So some of, why the change is there. One of the things I want to talk about as well is research will tell us that about 70% of transformations will fail. And I wanted to drill down into that a little bit further using some research here conducted by Gartner. So if we look at leading change and we look at the stages of change and some of why change is successful and unsuccessful here, what we can see is, first of all, we as leaders need to identify our response to change. Because Gartner's research here shows that managers who are fatigued are 8 times less likely to lead their teams through change. So really we'll be talking about, as we go through this 30-minute webinar, those of you that have attended before, you'll see I have reduced the time because I think an hour probably for everybody is too long, so 30-minute sessions just around lunchtime. So fatigued managers are 8 times less likely to lead that change. So we want to talk about what we can do about that and other things that might cause barriers to the change. Engaging in two-way change communication. So talk communication increases success by 32% and well-being by 33%. So what we know, I'll talk about that as we go through this 30 minutes, that in terms of successful transformation, communication is going to be one of those vital aspects of that. As well, empowering the team to take ownership of that change implementation. What's key as well in organisations today is about pushing the decision making down in the organisation. So decision making should not occur at the top of organisations. What we have learned over the last number of years is agility is key. And if you are waiting for your decisions to be made at the top of your organisations, that's going to slow things down. As an organisation, you will not be as agile. So what we found with Gartner's research is workforces engaged in implementation can increase change success by up to 24%. So are they involved? Are they engaged? And what authority and power do they have within the process? And then support change adoption. So willingness to change is 1.5 times higher when managers adopt this approach to change management. So we're looking at quicker change adoption and reducing change fatigue. So really, how do we go about doing that? Again, before I get into some of that detail, I just wanted to talk about a couple of things. First is, my guess is you will all be familiar with the Kubler-Ross change curve. And it is important when we're talking about transformations to talk about this and to consider this, because one of the things we've just talked about is transformation changing when managers are fatigued. So if we look at the change curve and we look at stage 1 being shock and denial. So we're going to look at here very briefly, because we're going to cover those again very shortly, is some of what is showing up for individuals. And for individuals, we need as leaders to be meeting people where they're at. In other words, we need to understand where people are at before we're going to meet them there. So we see first of all the shock and denial around this can't be happening. They won't follow through on this. This is just talk, it's just hot air. And moving in then to feeling that sense of frustration. Moving into stage 2 around the anger and depression, blaming others, wanting to point the finger at other people, this is your fault, why are we doing this? Really feeling a sense of feeling down, not feeling familiar with everything that's going on in the organisation, and feeling that sense of confusion around the state that we are in at the moment. And really what we're hoping to move in terms of successful transformational change is to move into that acceptance and integration, coming to commitment that, we've got this, and this change is creating value. And again, if people don't understand why we're creating change, the point of it, then why would they come along with us? Again, those of you that join these webinars will know I often highlight some research from McKinsey and Co. And so I just want to share this piece of research around successful transformations are likely to embed transformational principles into the business rather than simply the business as usual and doing things we've always done. So hopefully you'll be able to read this on your screens. So really, if we look at the very top one, executive level weekly meetings. So increased likelihood for successful transformations is by 2. So if we think about what are some of the practices that we need to have in place as leaders in the organisation. So we need to be meeting weekly briefings to talk about what's gone on last week, what's worked well, what we could maybe do better over the coming week. So keeping up to date with that change. Also, the monthly or quarterly business reviews. So thinking about those milestones, goals and objectives that we have, meeting monthly or quarterly to review those. In the early stages, I would certainly be suggesting monthly because things can slip massively within the quarter. Business objective and target setting, at 1.5 times more likely to have successful transformations. So what is it we're trying to achieve? What are the goals and objectives of this transformation? Measuring those, monitoring those, and also giving feedback on those. Conducting individual performance reviews, talking to individuals about their experiences, how they are feeling, and I'm going to talk shortly about ways in which we might do that. Business planning, budgeting and forecasting, again 1.4 more times likely for successful transformations. Unit level performance reviews, so again, looking at the organisation, the team and individual in terms of these reviews. Capital allocation, so again, if we think back to those of you that are familiar with Kaplan and Norton's business balance scorecard, we know that strategies fail quite often because resources have not been allocated to those strategies. In this case, it's a change or transformational strategy. So ensuring that the capital allocation, ensuring that we've got the IT resources, I think that is a big one today in terms of making the organisation more efficient and more effective, making sure that we are fully utilising the IT capabilities that we already have, looking at how we could perhaps improve with additional technology, and the other one is talent allocation. For those of you who have attended some of the other webinars before, I will continue to repeat to remind you that by 2030 there is expected to be a global talent shortage of 85 million. So ensure that you've got that talent allocation. So we're talking about numbers there. We also need to think about the employee experience, because really transformations don't occur by technology. They occur with people, which is why it's important to think back to the Kubler-Ross change curve. And so we need to ensure that people are staying with us during this transformation, that they're not leaving us. Yeah, there are some people perhaps that will leave, perhaps the organisation no longer fits for them. But you're going to find it, I'm sure you're finding that at the moment, it is much more difficult to replace those people. And secondly, in terms of talent allocation, we really need to be thinking about the skills and abilities of those individuals, ensuring that they have the ability to perform at the levels that are expected, that they have those capabilities, and that we help train them for those changes in behaviours. Because one thing that we know in terms of change, it's always easier to go back to the way we did things. So helping people to be more flexible and in their approach to change, rather than just deciding to do things as we have always done so. So to help us think about leading successful transformational change, what I would like to do, with your permission, is to use the ACT matrix. You will know that I use the ACT and the ProSocial Matrix when I'm running these webinars, and these are very simple tools because they're sorting tools. They're just helping to sort experiences. And these webinars, I really like these webinars to be experiential, so that you're learning as you're experiencing that learning as you're going along. So if I could start with, if you're thinking about leading transformations and leading change in your organisation, I first want to start with who's important to you. So if we're thinking about you leading change, who are the important people in your lives when we're thinking about leading change? So you may start with some of your work colleagues may be important to you. Please feel free to get involved in the chat box and let me know who are the people that you feel are important to you. Your clients will also be important to you. I'll put in me, because this is a me matrix. So you're also important in terms of this transformation, which means your family are also important to you within this context. And probably in terms of leading transformation, your suppliers are also going to be important. If we're thinking about that transformation, again, what I want to do is just come and ask here in the bottom left. When you start to think about leading transformations, what are the things that show up for you that are unwanted? Well, some things I've heard people talking about as individuals recently, they talk about the feeling of dread when this comes up. The feeling of guilt when you're leading that transformation, feeling uneasy about that, perhaps feeling anxious about what's to come. Oh, brilliant, thank you, Tori. Anxious, yeah. Feeling overwhelmed about what might come. Also maybe feeling things like doubt showing up and feeling unsure. Okay, moving into the top again. Think if we're going to lead successful transformation, what I talked earlier about meeting people where they're at. When we understand ourselves, we can understand others better. So what behaviours, conflicts of interest, yeah, so feeling conflicted, thanks Laura. So when the unwanted stuff shows up, what kind of things do you find yourself doing to get relief from those? So when that happens, you might avoid conversations, or people because of the guilt that's showing up. So what else might we see you doing? So, we might see or hear, we might hear raised voices if we're feeling overwhelmed and anxious. What else might we might hear some arguments with colleagues. We might you might just continue as was, ignore what's happening and just continue to do as you always did. You might create diversions in conversations to avoid having those conversations, or you might be absent at meetings. And displacement activity, absolutely. And we might procrastinate. So again, as you'll have seen me done before, it's the reminder here that as humans, as individuals, when this unwanted stuff shows up, there will always be some behaviours that we do to get relief from. Now just popping over again here over into the top right, if we think about who the important people are in terms of this transformational change that you may be leading. What would you do to bring satisfaction in the approach towards these people? So this is you as an individual. What might you do to get relief? So it might be you might seek clarity from others. That might even be data. So if these people are important, your colleagues, this change is going to happen. If we really want to move from the dread and the guilt, we might need to seek information from others. We might need to talk to colleagues about the change and the impact. So again, getting that better understanding as an individual. You might also, as a leader, if you're important, is take time to recharge. So you're going to need the energy to help create that change and really drive that change. And you might need to, support colleagues and so seek information. So again, just briefly is looking at thinking about what could I do that would bring satisfaction to me in this context, in terms of leading this successful change. One of the things that I hopefully I can do here is okay, some of this just isn't working for me. Okay, so what I want you to do is just think about here workability. So we think about all of these 4 areas. I want you to think about, are these behaviours working for me in terms of leading that successful change? And also this bit here in the middle is me noticing. So what we're asking here is, if I'm noticing here, is this working for me to lead that successful change? Do I have the opportunity to notice who's important, notice the unwanted stuff showing up, notice what I do to get relief from, is that relief working for me, and am I getting satisfaction? Because the more time we spend on the right side of this matrix getting satisfaction, the more chance we have of leading that successful change. So again, just jumping back to here, just to say, okay, so identify your response to change. So that's what we've been doing with the ACT matrix, is helping you to identify your response to change. Helping your leaders to identify their response to change, their individual response. But what we know then is, if we're going to lead that successful change, I've missed the chat box, so get organised and make a list and listen. Yeah, so absolutely, thank you, Tori. So listen and make a list. And if we move then into the leading successful transformational change, this is now as a collective leadership team. So if we are leading successful transformational change, what as a leadership team would be our shared purpose? What might be important to us, the group, the leadership team? While I wait for you in the chat box, I'm going to just put in a few things that I would hear people telling me in leadership teams. So success, progress, change. Sorry, I just seem to be not typing the best today. Also, urgency will be one of those things that's important, is keeping on that road in terms of that transformation. Excitement, creating excitement is important in terms of what's to come. Trusting us as leaders, being accountable as leaders, being transparent. These are all things, if you think about some of what we've talked about already, in terms of what's important, values, staying through difficulty, absolutely. One of the things we said was vital in terms of successful transformation is communication channels. Teamwork, we would say that we're all working together to get there. Curiosity is another one that's going to be important, and one that psychological safety, in terms of change initiatives, psychological safety is definitely one of those big ones. Okay, moving over to the bottom left. So if we're leading successful transformational change as leadership team, what are the likely things you think that are going to pop up for your leaders? What's social unwanted stuff? So when we come together as a leadership team, what are some of the unwanted stuff that might show up for your leadership team? I'm going to guess there's going to be some frustration showing up. Why do people not want to come along with us? Why are they going back to what they always did? Again, we talked about maybe as a leadership team, this feeling of guiltiness again. There's perhaps some fear of failure. Maybe a feeling of worried within that leadership team. They may be uncomfortable with the direction that they are also travelling on. They may feel uncertain about what's going on. And back to, they may also, like we as individuals are feeling, they may feel anxious about some of those changes. There may be some doubt showing up as well. So I want you to think about in your leadership team what is showing up. Because when we know what's showing up on the inside, then what we know are those are the barriers that we likely need to overcome for that successful change to occur. Because as I said earlier, transformations don't occur just through technology. It's people that are going to make these changes happen, and it's people that are likely to be able to hold us back. And that's natural because our minds like predictability. So what would we see in a leadership team in response to those relief behaviours? What might we see leadership teams doing? Some of what we've talked about already, even with ourselves. So we might see them avoiding things. We might see them as a leadership team procrastinating, even as well. So change being slow, no real urgency for that change, putting decisions off because of uncertainty. We may hear leaders, start again. Losing, okay. We may see leaders blaming others. Wasn't me made these decisions, it was such and such. I was all in favour of keeping what we did before. So we may see leaders coming up with excuses all the time. We may see them diverting conversations because they're getting into grounds that they're uncomfortable with. And we may see leadership teams at meetings catastrophizing, so talking about spending time talking about the worst case scenarios and how those might play out. And again, that might just add to holding people back, while we always need to look at identifying the risks. Catastrophizing at times is not necessarily going to be helpful for us. We might hear people holding back. What I mean by that is silent, not contributing to meetings because they're unsure of themselves and unsure of the direction that's travelled. We may see people miss deadlines for some of those change initiatives. We may see we may hear people with raised voices. just imagine your own organisation, even if you're completing this matrix yourself. Think about what's showing up in your organisation, because what's showing up in your organisation, when we understand why, then it's easier to look at what we can do to overcome those. So just remember that I'm visually here just showing those connections, the consequences of moving over then into the top right of the matrix. So if we're going to lead successful transformational change, what is it we need to do? Just aware now that I clearly have moved into 1 o'clock, so I hope that I haven't gone past your time here, and that you'll have to log out. So just what is it we need to do? Dictatorial, thank you. What I say goes. Okay, so what I say goes is over in that top left of the matrix. But thinking about now moving over to the top right, what are the satisfaction behaviours? So what could we do that would bring us satisfaction in relation to what's important? So when we think about what's important, we can do what's important. What happens in the top right is the doing. So what we need to do is we need to set a clear vision for the change with goals and milestones. We need to bring together a project team and dedicated time. If you don't give people dedicated time for these initiatives, then they are going to end up burnt out. So you need to give them dedicated time. It is not on top of their normal duties. You need to establish clear two-way communication channels. On that, really, if we talk about we've been talking about really then enabling people to talk about how they feel. So creating space for the team to talk about the change and how they feel. We need to consult and empower the team around these changes. Always better to get people on board, and we need to share the successes and milestones as we get there. We need to, as I talked earlier, is about develop plans for new behaviours and capabilities. So we don't just change organisations, it's likely we're going to need new capabilities as well within the organisation. And we need to develop performance systems to track progress. So again, what we can do is, if we're always thinking about what's in this bottom right, then we want to be looking at those and thinking about, so if we're going to be accountable and transparent, that's letting people know when things go well and they don't go well. So that's back to some of the performance management. Psychological safety is letting people talk about how they are feeling about those changes. So that's been a really quick tour around leading successful transformational change. But again, what I'd like to highlight just in terms of leading that successful transformational change is just in the middle here. This is about the non-judgmental and compassionate viewpoint. We are simply noticing here and not judging. So what I'd like you to do if you're leading that successful transformational change, see if you have the opportunity to notice what is important to the group that you're leading. What unwanted stuff might be showing up for them? What are they doing to get relief? And noticing what brings satisfaction to that group. So those of you that have come along before or coming for the first time, these are some of the ways in which I can help your organisation progress through and that change and transform your organisations. Appreciate you staying with me as I've gone over my time. If you have any questions from today or want to know more, please feel free to get in touch. Thank you for taking the time out to join me, to get involved in the chat box. 30 minutes passes very quickly. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Tori. Thank you both for joining me live here this afternoon. I hope that the information I have provided with you today has given you something to think about and something to take away and to do. So good luck, and if you've got any ideas of what you'd like me to cover in the coming months, please feel free to drop me a line. Best wishes. See you again at the next webinar. Take care. Have a good day.